The American Reform Movement. Imagine an America where a neighbor who didn't like you could join in with mobbing friends. The book Mobbing, published by Oxford University Press, goes into what mobbing is. And this neighbor with mobbing friends could make up lies about you using a suspicious activity report. Now imagine a country where those lies would be databased and where neighborhood watch group members would gang stalk you 24/7 for 8 years because our leaders turned them into a vigilante mob that unremittingly harasses and conspicuously surveils average citizens. Imagine an America where the people who are supposed to enforce the law, the police, and the people who are supposed to help you, firemen and security guards, join in gang stalking you 24/7 for years. Imagine an America so immoral that children are encouraged to gang stalk, and teenagers, and the very elderly, and the very handicapped. Imagine an America so unfree that not one press outlet reveals what's going on. Such an America would be in dire need of reform. Reform is necessary in America to reestablish our civil liberties. We need public laws and open decision-making processes where now we have secret laws and regulations. We need to make sure that location data can't be obtained by our government or law enforcement without a warrant. We need legislation like the Geolocation, Privacy, and Surveillance Act to become law. We need bills like H.R. 2818, the Surveillance State Repeal Act, to become law. If we don't act now, if we don't join together in the American Reform Movement, the surveillance state will get even bigger, with a nationwide network of license plate scanners, wide area drone surveillance, networks of Wi-Fi or RFID readers with smart roads, the widespread additions of microphones to surveillance cameras, and government cameras in even more invasive areas of our lives. The ACL warns us, experience suggests that the sweeping surveillance systems will be abused to illegally oppress lawful political dissidents and protesters, stifle political opposition, and squelch free speech. The civil rights movement and the women's movement showed us how change happens. It happens when we join together and work every day to get reform. We need to stop the names of average Americans who have done nothing wrong from winding up in intelligence agency databases. The ACLU tells us to be added to the corporate store, the NSA database, today you would have to do little more than order a takeout from the same restaurant as an NSA target. And once you're in there, NSA analysts can analyze your sensitive information any way they want. The ACLU, our premier civil liberties organization, tells us the reforms we must work for. NSA should be required to purge data that it has not affirmatively concluded has intelligence value. Queries to the corporate store NSA database should be restricted to those having a reasonable, articulable suspicion standard. Queries to and retention of data in the corporate store NSA database should be restricted to counterterrorism purposes. The Senate should assure that the FISA court approves and publishes any minimization procedures governing the retention and dissemination of data in the corporate store NSA database. Stingrays intended to fight terrorism are now being used against American citizens. The ACLU tells us stingrays can paint a precise picture of where we are and who we spend time with, including our location in a lover's house, in a psychologist's office, or at a political protest. We need to demand that police be allowed to use them only after getting a warrant. The U.S. government Suspicious Activity Reporting Program is targeting First Amendment activity. The names of citizens are being entered into databases even though their conduct is lawful. The ACLU tells us information about innocent activities by ordinary people ends up in counterterrorism databases to which local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies have access. This information can remain in federal databases for up to 30 years. We need to demand that the federal government abide by its own requirement that criminal intelligence information only be shared where there is reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, as the ACLU suggests. Fusion centers are targeting First Amendment activity rather than focusing solely on terrorism. Again, the ACLU has a whole slew of recommendations for how we can stop that. We were told in the 2-year investigative study by the Washington Post on Top Secret America, the top secret world the government created in response to the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, has become so large, so unwieldy, so secretive, that no one knows how much money it costs, how many people it employs, how many programs exist within it, or exactly how many agencies do the same work. More recently, a PhD sociology student and CIA analyst wrote a dissertation based on extensive interviews with analysts from all the major intelligence agencies and found there is too much information floating around and that the size of the counterterrorism apparatus hinders its effectiveness. There is way too much information, there are too many analysts, and the overload in staff and data makes less likely the possibility that the counterterrorism analysts will be effective in stopping terrorism. The more information there is, the more likely it is that the information will never reach the people who need it. Some in the intelligence community don't even know what they are supposed to do day to day. Even the people who would directly suffer as a result of cuts to the intelligence budgets believe that cutting those budgets would produce better public safety outcomes for society. You can find the article that I got all those quotes from at my website. The intelligence committees in Congress charged with the oversight of our intelligence community are small, and the agencies they provide oversight to are massive. Senator Dianne Feinstein has said the Senate Intelligence Committee was not satisfactorily informed about certain surveillance activities. Congress is often prohibited from reading critical documents before voting on legislation pertaining to the intelligence community. Members of Congress who are supposed to provide oversight to the intelligence community often seem more committed to protecting them. Intelligence officials often stonewall members of Congress responsible for their oversight. On their own, members of the Intelligence Committee often can't find things unless they are briefed. Members of the intelligence community sometimes lie to Congress. We need to demand that the committees charged with the oversight of our intelligence community have the staff and the resources to provide oversight that works. We need to demand that the director of the National Intelligence Agency comply with Government Accountability Office audits of the intelligence community. We need to enhance the GAO audit powers to determine the effectiveness of intelligence community programs. These things and more need to be the national security state reform we have to stand up for. But we know the problem. Our representatives don't listen to us. That's why electoral reform has to be part of the American reform movement. We need representatives to be more accessible to the people. With proportional representation in the House of Representatives, we can work to have one representative for every 100,000 people. With proportional representation, voters will get the representation they deserve, and political groups will be represented in proportion to their strength in the electorate. What this reform will do is end the two-party corporate tyranny and give the United States the multiple parties it needs in Congress to help make the voices of all Americans heard. And it can be accomplished with legislation. Proportional representation does not need a constitutional amendment. We know the other big problem in elections: the influence big money can buy. That's why the American reform movement has to work for economic reform. Since the Wall Street crash, 95% of all new income has gone to the top 1%. The top 1% own 38% of the financial wealth in America. The bottom 60% own 2.3% of the financial wealth in America. Real wages adjusted for inflation are decreasing. Trade policies have caused the closing of 50,000 factories. More people than ever before in the United States are living in poverty, while people at the top are doing phenomenally well. I learned those facts from a speech by Senator Bernie Sanders. For all these reasons, economic reform must be part of the American reform movement. Joseph Stiglitz, a Columbia economics professor, has a plan to change that. It includes raising corporate income taxes while providing incentives for investments and job creation in the U.S., reducing spending on corporate welfare, taxing the financial sector, taxing monopolies and other rent-based enterprises, ensuring multinationals pay their fair share of taxes and have incentives to invest in America, increasing taxes on industries that produce negative externalities, making dividends tax deductible, but imposing a withholding tax. Stiglitz goes on to emphasize the importance of transparency. The demand for more transparency in government has to be a big part of the American reform movement. There is a link on my website to Stiglitz's ideas and his interview with Bill Moyers. There should be no doubt in anyone's mind. The thinking of our government has to change. It has to change from event thinking to systems thinking. It has to acquire a whole new set of habits, tools, concepts to understand the dynamic world we live in, to see the relationship between things, and to make better decisions. As the 2016 presidential election approaches, we have to be ready with our demands for reform in America. We have to demand the two major parties nominate reformers who will finally give America the change it wants. You can visit my website. It's at www.theamericanreformmovement.com, www.stopgangstalkingpolice.com, www.wholenewparadigm.com. Thank you for listening.